Hello and welcome to my channel if this is the first video of mine that you are watching, but if it is not, welcome back. Today, as you can tell by the title, I'm going to be talking about my spring TBR, and I think I'm still going to refer to it as a TBR. However, I saw that Tony over on An Erudite Adventure referred to his quarterly reading list goals as an MBR, as in might be read. And I think that unlocked something in my brain. I love the idea of referring to a list of books as an MBR because it might be read, it might not. I am very much a mood reader, I think, and I have had many TBRs that have just fallen to the wayside, and then I get really disappointed in myself for not reaching this arbitrary goal. So I have 15 books that I would like to read this spring, and if you have been around for a while, this is basically part of my 24 for 2024 TBR rebranded, because I did not finish that TBR last year and I've carried it forward into 2025. And to make it a little bit more manageable, I've set myself the goal of reading 2 books from that larger reading list every month, which would bring me into August, and then I still have a handful of months left in the year if I don't quite make those reading goals, because a lot of the books on my 24 for 2024 TBR were quite lengthy, chunky books. So I have a lot of them next to me here, but they're not the entirety of this spring TBR, because those books are quite dark fantasy, military fantasy heavy, and I wanted just a little bit more lightness going into spring. So I've got 15 books next to me that I would like to read over the course of the next 3 months. And I think that's a manageable number for me, while also giving myself some leeway to read random books from the library that I stumble across on Libby. Before we get into the video, I don't have a cocktail pairing today. I have just made myself a cup of coffee here, but I do want to acknowledge that if you hear some gentle purring in the background and see all of this cat hair flying before the camera, my cat Spencer has joined us today. He is currently half on the arm of this chair, half on my leg, and I did lint roll this sweater before I started, but I'm already covered in cat hair. And my final little disclaimer is it is the middle of the afternoon and we have already had cloudy weather, rain, snow, blue skies, and now we're back to cloudy weather. So it has just been a temperamental day outside. So I don't know what the lighting is going to do in this situation, but we're just gonna roll with it and roll right on into the books. And that first book is Ravenor Returned by Dan Abnett. This is the second book in the Ravenor trilogy by Abnett, which takes place after the Eisenhorn trilogy by Abnett, which I have already read. And this is a Warhammer 40k novel. So it is quite dark, quite gory. It's a military, sci-fi, space opera, space exploration type of vibe for this book. I have really enjoyed what I have read by Abnett in the Warhammer 40k universe. I really enjoy the way that he develops his characters and the way that he challenges their ideals, because in this universe, at least on its surface, it's very black and white between what is good and what is evil, what is chaos, and who are those who are trying to defend and defeat chaos. But then you follow along with these characters as they explore and see more and visit more folks within their universe, and you see their ideals and their staunchness in those ideals evolve and change. And as a reader, you're left with the question for yourself on whether that flexibility of their beliefs is a good thing or a bad thing. I love Abnett's characters, and I love the way he develops his characters. So I'm looking forward to returning to the Warhammer 40k universe with Ravenor Returned, with the second book in this trilogy. It has been a while since I read the first book, so I'm definitely going to need to at least skim through and remind myself of those events before I pick up this book, but looking forward to ticking this one off of my list. Then the next book that I would like to read this spring is a dark fantasy, and that is The Wolf's Call by Anthony Ryan. And I've seen a lot of hype and praise for this author online, but I've not read anything by him yet. And I've had this book on my shelf for, I want to say, at least 2 years now. So really hoping that I pick this one up this spring. But we are following in The Wolf's Call, a reluctant hero, which is a trope that I absolutely adore. And our main character, Valen, has already earned and achieved his glory. He has fought for the realm. He's a living legend, and he really just kind of wants to live out his retirement. He's done enough. He's sacrificed enough. But whispers have begun to creep across the country that there is an army being led by a man who believes he is a god, and Valen has no choice but to pick up his sword again to confront this powerful new threat. And he is challenged in ways that he has not been challenged before. I am really looking forward to this. Quite a few of the books on this reading list are military fantasy, which is something that I have not quite been in the mood for, but I am currently reading Gotrek and Felix, which takes place within the larger Warhammer universe. It's a Warhammer Chronicles novel, and that is quite military-esque, heavier, dark fantasy, I would say. And it's definitely whetted my appetite to return to this subgenre. So I'm looking forward to picking up The Wolf's Call when that time comes. And that leads me perfectly into my third book that I'm hoping to get to this spring, because that is The Black Company by Glenn Cook, which is the pioneering novel of modern military fantasy, according to this cover from Tor Essentials. And yes, again, this is a dark military fantasy. From what I know of The Black Company, it does perpetuate some of those classic fantasy tropes, but I really love reading classic literature to understand the bones, the base, the foundations that our more modern authors are using when they come to write the books that are taking the world by storm now. I think it's really important to know and understand those classic fantasy tropes well, and I do tend to just enjoy them. So from what I know, this is following that very classic good versus evil trope, and we are following a military band whilst we do so. So I'm really looking forward to picking this one up, and I might actually choose to read The Black Company before I dive back into Ravenor Returned or The Wolf's Call, because I think this would help develop and help me understand some of the foundations for military fantasy, which definitely come into play with those previous books. The fourth book that I'm hoping to read this spring is another military fantasy, and it's the last military fantasy on my list, but that is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wang. And this was recommended to me about a year ago, I think, and it was actually recommended to me by the tattoo artist who did my fantasy sleeve and who brought my little dragon to life. And I really respect his opinion on books, and he recommended it to me before it had even been picked up by a traditional publisher, and said it was really enjoyable, amazing, 10 out of 10 would recommend. And I've wanted to pick it up. However, I do know the main character we are following is a mother, and it's the mother character who has to pick her sword back up again and go back into battle and fight, even though she very much wants to live out her retirement. And I believe there are themes of mother, child, and what you are willing to do for your children and what you're willing to sacrifice for them and for the betterment of their future. And that's been a bit of a sensitive topic for me because I lost my mom about 2 years ago now. I think I'm ready to read this book. I think I'm ready to read a military fantasy with a mother character at the core of its story. We'll see when I dive into it. If it is a little bit too much, I'm totally okay with just setting it aside for a little bit longer, and I know it'll be there waiting for me when I am ready to read it. But I do know this has gone on to receive a lot of praise online, and a lot of people online really enjoy the Sword of Kaigen. So I think I'm pronouncing that right. Either the Sword of Kaigen or the Sword of Kaigen. But yes, I do have this book on my spring MBR because I might read this. We'll see how I feel when it gets closer to the time. Then the next book that I am hoping to read is another fantasy book. And spoiler alert, all 15 books that I have set out to read this spring are fantasy, but this one is The Thousand Eyes by A.K. Larkwood, which is the sequel to The Unspoken Name, which are part of the Serpent Gates duology. So this is the last book in a duology, and it has sat on my shelf for probably 2 years or so, and I haven't read it. And I think it has been 3 or 4 years even since I read The Unspoken Name. So this is another book that I'm going to need to refresh myself on before I dive in. But I would absolutely love to finish this duology and see how Larkwood concludes this story. From what I recall, this might be young adult, or I just think there was no explicit romance within this story. There are hints of a female-female romantic relationship, and I'm so excited to see how that develops, and I hope it develops further within this book here. But our main character is an orc, and I also love the subversion of that classic fantasy trope of orcs as mindless monsters. I love authors who are breathing more life into these fantasy characters and making them more than just these mindless monsters. I have a work in progress that features an orc character, so I have a heavy bias towards orcs as the main character. So an orc is the main character in this book. She begins the series, the duology, as a priestess, but then turns her back on her devotion to follow this wizard, and they kind of pair up. And I believe there were even some hints of sci-fi within the first book. Definitely going to need to refresh myself on the events that took place leading up to this conclusion, but I'm definitely going to be reaching for this probably in May or at the very end of April, I think. The next book that I'm hoping to read this spring is 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker, and this is the first book in the Siege trilogy. I have read 2 novellas by Parker, and I really enjoy their more humorous tone while writing. I love a book or a story that can make me genuinely laugh out loud, and that was the case with Prosper's Demon and Inside Man by Parker. And from what I've read online, 16 Ways is quite similar, We're following a scoundrel, rogue type character who is willing to lie, cheat, steal, do whatever it takes to achieve the goal he wants. And basically a siege is coming for this city that our main character is in, and he needs to defeat the odds and save it. From what I've read and from what I recall of Parker's writing, this gives me very similar vibes to Scott Lynch's The Gentleman Bastards series. So I think this is going to be a laugh out loud, really entertaining, enjoyable read that will help break up the dark military fantasy sci-fi books that I have already talked about within this spring TBR. So really, really looking forward to this book here. Then the next 3 books that I have on this list all go hand in hand. They are all historical fantasy, and they are all by the same author, and that is Juliet Marillier. And I have even already begun reading The Harp of Kings by Juliet Marillier. And that is because this book here was on my 24 for 2024 TBR. So I picked it up to tick it off of my list and to finally get to it. And I was really enjoying it and loving it. We're following a bard who is training to be a warrior on an undercover mission. But when I got to about almost halfway through the book, I realized we are following the 2nd generation of characters from Marillier's Blackthorn and Grimm trilogy, which I have read the first book of and then put a pause on it to read the Warrior Bards trilogy. But when I realized this takes place chronologically first, and Marillier recommends you read the books in order of chronology, I stopped reading The Harp of Kings and I ordered the rest of the Blackthorn and Grimm series. So that is Den of Wolves and Tower of Thorns. I absolutely adored the first book in this trilogy. We are following a healer in Blackthorn and a mercenary type character in Grimm. And these 2 characters have been through so much. They are very emotionally and mentally damaged. There's a lot of trauma that they have been through, but at the end of the day, they want to do what is right for the greater good. And they're also trying to fight their own demons and come to terms with their own demons. I don't think I'm explaining this series well, but it takes place in an ancient Ireland-esque world where there is otherworldliness afoot. There are fae within this world, and the hint of the little folk who are interfering and willing to interfere with human plots. And I just adored our 2 characters. I want them to be safe and happy and warm and to be loved. And I think they're going to get there, but they're definitely going to go through a little bit more pain before they do. So I really want to read the concluding 2 books in this trilogy, and then I will return to the 2nd generation within this shared world. So those are 3 books that I'm hoping to get to. And I probably will guarantee that I will get to these books this spring just because I want to see how this book ends. The next few books that I'm hoping to get to this spring are ones that I'm going to be getting out from the library. And that is something I have tried to build into this MBR list. Just that consciousness of my own reading habits and the fact that I know I have a tendency to get a lot of books out from the library. But the first one is The Last Light of the Sun by Gavriel K, which is the next book in publication order by him that I have to read. And I don't own a physical copy, and I don't know what edition I would like to add to my collection. If I just want to go out and buy the current published edition, or if I want to hold out and try to find a really gorgeous older edition secondhand. So I'm going to get this book out from the library for now and give myself a little bit more time to decide which physical copy I would like to pick up. But The Last Light of the Sun is evoking Anglo-Saxon and Celtic and Viking cultures within a fantastical world. Kay writes alternative history with fantasy-esque elements or an otherworldliness. His writing and his books are often described as historical fantasy because, very similar to Marillier, he evokes times of our own past, but then often he will also inject this sense of otherworldliness, this sense of magical realism. And I adore the way that Kay writes his characters and how he paints all of these shades of gray. And I'm so looking forward to picking up another Kay novel because it's been about a month or so since I read Lord of Emperors. So I'm definitely chomping at the bit to pick up another Kay novel. And The Last Light of the Sun promises to bring to life an unforgettable world balanced on the knife edge of change through the use of saga, song, and chronicle. So looking forward to my next Kay novel. Then the next two books on my list are ones that I actually just got out from the library. So these I'm probably going to be reading within the first couple of weeks of April. But the first one is Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson, which is a YA fantasy. And I believe this is a little bit of an enemies to lovers, perhaps a little bit of found family within this book too. And it's the start of a series, and I think it's just a duology. Yes, there's only 2 books in this series. I've heard lots of great things about it, but haven't picked it up myself until now. And again, this was one of those books that I just saw it on Libby and thought, you know what? Yeah, I want to see what people are talking about and read it for myself. So my hold came due just last night even, I think. So I have this and I'm ready to dive into it soon. I also have The Wren in the Holly Library by K.A. Lind out from the library. And this is an explicit fantasy romance from what I know, which is very little. But what pushed me over the edge to put a hold on this book is the dedication. And I saw the dedication online. But the author dedicates this book to the girls who fell for the library before the beast. So obviously this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I am hoping for some gorgeous, evocative descriptions and imagery about said stunning library. And I love a Beauty and the Beast retelling. It's my favorite retelling by far. So we'll definitely be picking that one up within the next 19 days because that is when it's due and I'm looking forward to it. Then the 13th book that I would like to read this spring is one that I have a hold on through Libby. And it says it will be available for me in around 8 weeks. So this is one that I'll probably be reading in June. So right at the cusp end of spring, beginning of summer. And that is Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. I read Divine Rivals about a month ago now or so. And this is another book that I've heard a lot about. I've heard a lot of people love this new adult enemies to lovers fantasy romance, and I didn't pick it up for myself just because I'm somewhat hesitant when a journalist is our main character, because I have read so many, I don't want to say bad journalist characters, but tropey journalist characters. And I've read so many scenarios in which, as someone who has worked in a newsroom, are just so outlandish and so impossible, and just there's such bias and no editor would stand for it. Anyways, I'm getting away from myself. But Ross did not do that in Divine Rivals. I really enjoyed the way that she brought this historical fantasy, this alternative 1940s-esque time to life within this series. And I love, love, love the fact that she distinguished between what is a column and what is an article within this duology. And that's one of my biggest bugbears, I would say. So really looking forward to seeing how this story concludes. I'm rooting for our two main characters, our love interest, and I can't wait to see what happens next. My penultimate book that I would like to read this spring is one that I've already spoken about quite recently, and that is The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. And this is a cozy fantasy, and even just this cover evokes spring vibes to me. A lot of the books on this list are a little bit darker, but this book I'm hoping will really feel like spring contained within the pages of a novel. And we are following a former librarian who escapes away from the library that has been burned down to live out her life in her previous hometown. She has a little cottage in the woods. She makes jam. She has a very handsome, nosy neighbor, and her assistant is a sentient houseplant. So outlandish, fun, cozy vibes. I'm hoping to get to this one probably in May, I think, but we'll see. Then finally, the last book that I'm hoping to read this spring is A Fragile Enchantment by Allison Saft, which is again another historical fantasy. This is YA fantasy, but it takes place in an alternative reality, a fantastical Regency England-esque setting. And I love my historical romances. I love the Regency England period. And I'm really excited to see Saft's more fantastical take on it. I've really enjoyed the way that Olivia Atwater plays within this similar subgenre. And this actually gives me very similar vibes to Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I believe that is the book's name, because we are following a seamstress who it is discovered that she can weave magic into the clothing garments that she makes. So she is taken away by the royal family to create clothing for the royal wedding. However, her and the groom develop an unlikely friendship, and that is them there on the cover. So we know they are going to be our end goal couple. And this, I believe, is a standalone. Yes, this is a standalone. So I'm really looking forward to reading this whimsical, Regency-esque fantasy romance. And I think just based on the cover, this is also going to evoke a lot of springtime vibes with the pastels and the florals that are used here. But those are the 15 books that I am hoping to read over the course of the next 3 months or so. It's a little bit lofty, a little bit heavy with a lot of dark military-esque books, but there's a few novels in there that I think will add the brevity and levity that I need after those type of books. As always, please let me know down in a comment below if you have read any of the books that I've spoken about today, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. But for now, that is going to be it for me. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I will be back soon with a new one. Bye for now.